Today I'm going to be reviewing and testing Smithey Cast Iron Double Burner Griddle, so let's get started. Before getting into the griddle itself, I think Smithey is worth talking about because this isn't your typical mass-produced cast iron. So Smithey Ironware is an American cookware company inspired by vintage cast iron. The founder, Isaac Morton, started by restoring old cast iron cookware and became particularly interested in the incredible smooth cooking surfaces found on those older skillets. That eventually became the inspiration behind Smithey, creating modern cast iron with some of the craftsmanship and smooth cooking surfaces associated with vintage pieces. Smithey cookware is made in the United States, and it really is designed around the idea of buying cookware once and keeping it for generations. They actually refer to their cookware as modern heirlooms. The one thing that has helped establish Smithey's reputation is that their number 12 cast iron skillet, which earned first place in America's Test Kitchen Cast Iron Skillet Review. It was particularly recognized for its smooth, polished cooking surface, heat retention, and overall design. So while we're not testing the number 12 today, that is part of the reason why I was interested in seeing how Smithey's approach to cast iron translates into something much larger, like their double burner griddle. Now this is definitely not a small piece of cookware. The griddle itself is 19.5 inches long, 12 inches wide, 1 inch deep. Now the cooking surface is a little bit smaller with 18 inches. It is approximately 13 pounds. Now it's designed to sit across 2 burners, giving a much larger cooking surface than you'd get with a traditional skillet. Probably the biggest thing separating this from a lot of traditional cast iron griddles is its cooking surface. Smithy polishes its cast iron to create a satin smooth surface rather than leaving the rough texture that you see in a lot of modern cast irons, and we'll actually test this a little bit later when we try grilling eggs. Now the first thing I wanted to test was a simple grilled cheese, so I needed to make a bread very quickly, and I will link my bread recipe below. So I just pulled the ingredients together quickly, threw it in the bread machine, and let it do its magic. Now another major reason this griddle caught my attention is that there are no chemicals and non-stick coating. Smithy says its cast iron is completely free of PFAS, PFAO, and PTFE. Instead, the griddle comes pre-seasoned with a pure grapeseed oil. That seasoning creates this naturally non-stick surface, and theoretically, it should continue improving the more you cook with it. So unlike the coated non-stick griddle where you eventually worry about it scratching or wearing off, this is a cooking surface that actually is supposed to get better with age. And I do have a few other Smithy products, and I can attest to the fact that they season very well. So for this first test, I just sauteed some apples for about 30 seconds, and then I did use a little bit more butter than I normally do on my cast iron. I just was worried about potentially sticking, but after using it, I realized I didn't need to use this much butter, and I didn't need to worry about it sticking. But I just put my bread on there, I put some apples and some cheese, and I just did a normal grilled cheese. Now I am testing this on a gas stove, but Smithy says that the double burner griddle actually works with gas, electric, glass top induction, and open flame. However, I do want to specify that Smithy specifically says the griddle performs best on gas. That's because the flame can spread the heat across the underside of the griddle more quickly and evenly. Electric and glass top ranges may require a little bit additional preheating time. And while Smithy lists the griddle as an induction compatible cookware, they point out that the compatibility can vary because of the size of the griddle. It may prevent the entire bottom from making contact necessary to complete the induction heating. It is important to note that just because it's compatible doesn't necessarily mean that it's the best performance overall. And I will say with induction and glass top, you do want to heat up the griddle slowly so that it will heat up evenly and give it a little extra time. The handles are actually another unusual feature. Instead of it simply molding handles into the cast iron, Smithy uses cast stainless steel handles that are riveted into the griddle. They're designed to provide a balance of secure grip, but they also give the griddle a much more premium appearance. That's part of Smithy's whole philosophy with this product. They intentionally design it to be attractive enough that you can leave it sitting out on your range rather than having to find somewhere to store this 13-pound piece of cast iron. So the next thing that I wanted to test was actually a breakfast. So I did make some pancakes. Like I said, I'll link all the recipes below, but I wanted to try a traditional pancake on the griddle along with some chicken sausage, and I also wanted the classic test of eggs. Also with this, I wanted to see if I could actually do an entire large breakfast with this one skillet. So I got my eggs, my pancake mix, and my chicken sausage all together. got it prepared, and we were ready to start cooking. Now, one feature that could make a double burner griddle considerably more useful than a regular skillet is that it has 2 burners, and they don't have to stay the same temperature. Smithey recommends initially setting both burners to approximately medium heat and preheating the griddle around 10 minutes. But once the entire piece has come up to temperature, you can adjust the 2 burners independently. That means theoretically you could have a higher heat on one side and a lower heat on the other. So you could sear or actively cook food on one side while keeping the other food for finishing, which you'll see that I do later with the sausages. Or you could cook 2 foods simultaneously that require different temperatures. Now with that does come different heat distribution. Now one of the biggest things about cast iron is the fact that it's excellent at retaining heat, but it doesn't necessarily distribute heat as quickly as materials like aluminum. And this is a particularly large piece of cast iron sitting over 2 relatively small heat sources. Smithey acknowledges that you may initially have some hot spots while the griddle is heating. The solution is time. They recommend approximately 10 minutes to preheat over medium heat so that the heat has time to spread throughout the whole cast iron before you start cooking. So rather than simply seeing whether it gets hot, you want to see how evenly does the entire 18-inch cooking surface actually heat. And as you've seen, I did have some pancakes that were a little bit darker in areas, but even the ones that were not dark, they still cooked all the way through. Now, another thing I want to talk about is the weight. This does weigh approximately 13 pounds, and that's before you put food on it. The weight is partially responsible for the heat retention that makes the cast iron so good for searing and high temperature cooking, but it's also potentially one of the griddle's biggest disadvantage. I didn't find it particularly hard to move around, but it is heavy. The handles do make it much more manageable. It wasn't awkward to carry from the sink, although its size did make it a little bit harder to wash. And I actually do prefer heavier cookware, so for me it wasn't an issue at all, but I did want to point it out that it is a heavy piece of cookware. Now, some of the things that you can actually cook on a griddle like this, you can do obviously the pancakes, French toast, eggs, sausage, hash browns. You can also go into the smash burgers, grilled cheese, quesadillas, but I also think one of the things that it's best for is a steak. The cast iron has the ability to hold heat and develop this really good crust, and you can really get it to a high temperature, so I think steak is actually an excellent protein to cook on a cast iron griddle like this. Now, one more thing about the construction, there is a channel running around the perimeter of the cooking surface that's not just decorative. It is designed to actually catch grease, oil, and juices when you're cooking so they don't run and pull underneath the food. It also keeps it from going onto your actual stove. And as you can see from this test, it actually caught my eggs that ran off of the griddle. Now, I will say I was so impressed with how this griddle cooked the eggs. There was absolutely no sticking. It was so easy. I honestly didn't need to use butter, and that's one of the biggest things with Smithey is it comes pre-seasoned like that. But I was able to cook so much food on this one griddle. It just worked so well and so conveniently. Now, like I said before, probably the biggest thing that separates Smithey cast iron from other cast iron is the fact that they use a polished cast iron that creates a satin smooth surface rather than leaving it rough. The first big thing about this is food has fewer crevices to grab onto, which makes sticking less of an issue. And second, it should make cleanup considerably easier. Smithey actually says its polished cast iron can practically wipe clean, and despite the old rule that you should never put soap on a cast iron, Smithey says you can use soap to clean it. Now, I did have a little bit of sticking from the chicken sausage. It was apple chicken sausage, so it just had that sugar from the apples that stuck to it. But I just used the Pampered Chef scraper and it scraped right off. Other than that, it was incredibly easy to clean. Now, I do always dry my cast iron and then I put it on the stove and heat it up really high, put a little avocado oil. I rub the avocado oil and then I let my cast iron start smoking, and that actually lets the oil adhere to the surface. And then I wipe it once more, turn off my oven, and let it cool down. Now, I do this for 2 reasons. 1, to add season back to it from where I washed it, and 2, to make sure that my griddle is very, very dry. I heard a long time ago that a dry cast iron doesn't rust, so I try to make sure that it is as dry as possible. Now, Smithey has a wonderful tutorial on YouTube on how to keep their cast iron good and clean and seasoned. So I will try to link that below. So final thoughts, I highly recommend it. I bought this with my own money. I just really, really like their cast iron and carbon steel. So I highly recommend it if you're in the market for a double burner griddle. Thanks, and until next time, bye.